You know that person who never posts their photos online? No selfies, no celebrations, not even a profile picture that shows their face clearly. While everyone else is documenting every coffee, every sunset, every mirror selfie, they stay completely invisible. And you might think they're just shy, insecure, maybe hiding something. But here's what psychology actually reveals. These people might be operating on a completely different level of consciousness than the rest of us. And what I'm about to show you will change how you see them, and maybe even yourself. Think about it for a second. We live in a world where your worth is measured in likes, where your weekend didn't happen unless you posted it, where people genuinely panic if they don't get enough engagement on a photo. The average person checks their social media 58 times a day. 58 times. That's once every 16 minutes you're awake. We've built entire identities around being seen, being noticed, being validated by people we've never even met. But then there's this small group of people who just don't participate. They're not Amish. They're not technophobes. They use their phones just like everyone else. They just refuse to play the game. And neuroscience is now revealing that their brains might actually be wired differently, that they've discovered something most people spend their entire lives searching for. Let me explain what's really happening here. When you post a photo online, something fascinating happens in your brain. Your dopamine system lights up, waiting for those notifications. Each like, each comment triggers a small reward response. Sounds harmless, right? Except Harvard researchers discovered something disturbing. They found that people who frequently post selfies score higher on measures of narcissism, but significantly lower on self-compassion. Read that again. The more you seek validation online, the less kind you become to yourself. Because every photo becomes a test. Every post is a performance review. And you're never quite good enough. Your brain literally starts viewing you as an object for evaluation. Psychologists call this self-objectification. You begin seeing yourself through other people's eyes, constantly judging, constantly critiquing, constantly performing. But people who don't post, they've completely opted out of this cycle. They're not building their self-worth on a foundation of hearts and likes. They're not letting algorithms dictate how they feel about themselves. They've found something the rest of us are desperately chasing: intrinsic self-worth. Worth that doesn't fluctuate based on whether someone double-tapped their photo. And here's what's fascinating. Studies show these people actually have what psychologists call a stable self-concept. Their identity doesn't change based on external feedback. They know who they are, whether 10 people see them or 10,000. That's not insecurity. That's the opposite. But let's go deeper. Because not everyone who avoids the spotlight does it from pure confidence. Some do it because life taught them to. Maybe they were betrayed by someone they trusted. Maybe they learned early that showing vulnerability feels dangerous. Maybe they've been judged, criticized, or misunderstood so many times that putting themselves out there feels like handing someone a loaded weapon. So they retreat. Not because they don't want connection, but because protection feels safer than exposure. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, or avoidant attachment. It's a survival strategy that develops when the world feels unsafe. And honestly, can you blame them? Every photo you post opens the door to critique, to comparison, to the exhausting performance of being on all the time. For some people, it's just easier to opt out, to keep their peace, to control exactly what parts of their life are shared and which parts stay sacred. Think about what happens when you post. Within minutes, people are analyzing your appearance, your location, who you're with, what you're doing. Your ex is watching. That person from high school you barely remember is forming opinions. Strangers are making judgments based on a single frozen moment. For people who value their privacy, this isn't connection, it's invasion. They're not antisocial, they're self-protective. And in a world where everything is public, where every moment is documented, where privacy is becoming extinct, that's actually a form of intelligence. Now here's something most people completely miss about this. For some people, especially introverts, posting a photo isn't just clicking a button. It's an energy exchange. It's opening yourself up to comments, DMs, questions, expectations. It's the constant hum of digital noise. It's people feeling entitled to your attention, your time, your emotional bandwidth. And for introverts, that's genuinely draining. See, introverts don't hate people, but social interaction, even online, costs them energy. It needs to be recharged through solitude. For them, solitude isn't loneliness. It's breathing room. It's when their thoughts get loud enough to be heard, when reflection becomes clarity, when they can finally recharge without the world demanding more from them. So, they stay quiet online, not because they're hiding, because they're protecting their energy. And in a world that glorifies extroversion, that constantly tells us we need to be out there, to be networking, to be visible, choosing solitude is often misunderstood. But there's actual research on this. Studies on what's called internal locus of evaluation show that these people judge themselves by their own standards, not others. They prefer one deep conversation over 100 shallow interactions. They're not interested in performing connection. They want real connection. And social media, for all its promises of bringing people together, often delivers the opposite. It gives us the illusion of connection without the substance. These people recognize that, and they've chosen substance over simulation. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some people avoid posting photos because they see social media for exactly what it is: a performance, a highlight reel, a carefully curated version of reality. And they refuse to participate in the illusion. They don't want to distort who they are for likes. They don't want to reduce their complex, multifaceted identity to a filtered image and a clever caption. To them, their true self is something more than what can be captured in a picture. And they'd rather be unseen than misrepresented. This is what psychologists call identity preservation. They're not rejecting connection. They're rejecting the performance of connection. Think about how much mental energy goes into a single post. You take 47 photos to get one good one. You edit it. You write and rewrite the caption. You agonize over the timing. You check obsessively for responses. And at the end of all that, what have you actually communicated? A fraction of who you really are. A manufactured moment designed for consumption. These people look at that entire process and think, what's the point? They know that the person in those perfectly lit, perfectly angled photos isn't really them. It's an avatar, a brand, a performance of self designed to generate positive feedback. And they want no part of it. There's actually a term for this in psychology: impression management fatigue. When the constant effort of managing how others perceive you becomes exhausting. So they opt out completely. They let their real-life presence speak for itself. They let their actions, their words, their actual relationships define them. Not pixels, not posts, not performances. Now let's talk about what happens when you spend significant time alone, whether by choice or circumstance. Solitude shapes you. It gives you an emotional intelligence most people never develop. You start noticing patterns in your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions. You understand yourself in ways others never will. You can read a room before anyone speaks. Artists, writers, philosophers, so many of them chose solitude. They let it feed their creativity. They valued depth over breadth. But solitude has a shadow side too. Some people are alone not because they chose it, but because life made it so. Maybe they have few friends. Maybe their relationships feel shallow. Maybe their family misunderstands them. So they put on a confident face, hide their vulnerability, keep their distance. This is protective solitude, a survival strategy. They've learned that relying on others can hurt, so they rely on themselves. And yet, deep down, there's often a quiet longing for someone to simply ask, "Are you really okay?" Here's the paradox. Being alone can be both freedom and isolation, peace and loneliness, a place of safety and a place of longing. Some days solitude feels like bliss. Other days it feels like being invisible. And that tension, that push and pull between the freedom of being alone and the ache of being unseen, is what defines many of these people. They're not broken. They're survivors, thinkers, feelers, quiet warriors navigating a world that often misunderstands them. They show us that happiness doesn't always come from being surrounded by others. That strength isn't just endurance, but self-reliance. That connection can be internal, not just external. So the next time you notice someone who never posts their photos, don't assume they're hiding. They might be confident enough to not need constant validation. They might be protecting their peace in a world that constantly demands more. They might be conserving their energy for things that actually matter. They might be refusing to perform a version of themselves for an audience that doesn't really know them. Or they might be all of these things at once. In a world that screams to be noticed, maybe the most powerful choice is knowing you don't have to be. Maybe real confidence isn't about being seen by everyone. It's about being understood by the right people. Maybe privacy isn't something to apologize for. It's something to protect. And maybe, just maybe, these invisible people have figured out something the rest of us are still learning. Your worth isn't determined by your visibility. Your identity isn't defined by your image. And your life doesn't need to be documented to be real. If this changed how you see these people, or helped you understand yourself better, then hit the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel. I upload new videos 3 times weekly, diving deep into psychology and self-improvement most people never talk about.